Welcome once again to part 7 of this Zelda timeline attempt. In the last episode, it was shown that Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, was almost certainly a direct sequel in the timeline to the original Legend of Zelda, and that the original Legend of Zelda almost certainly took place in the young Link side of the timeline. In this video, we'll look more at Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, in an attempt to nail down their placement. To start with, we'll look at Zelda 2 on its own merits. If our findings about the original title were correct, then we should find that Zelda 2, at the very least, is eligible for placement in the young Link timeline on its own merits. An even better finding would be to see that it must be placed in the young Link timeline, which would give even better proof of the initial placement. Now, I have already stated that this is where things get difficult with the timeline. Indeed, one of the reasons it's taken me so long to post this continuation is because I have gone back and rechecked all of my facts for this game's placement. So, fair warning, go make sure you have some caffeine, because this shit is about to get heavy. More so than the original title, the placement of Zelda 2 in the timeline relies more on the information given in the instruction manual than anything else, for reasons given in the previous video that I won't go over again here. The instruction manual tells us that while helping with the reconstruction of Hyrule, a strange mark appeared on Link's hand as it came upon his 16th birthday. When Link showed the mark to Impa, she took him to North Castle, where Link would learn of the Legend of Zelda, the very legend from which every other Zelda game derives its name, except, ironically, this one. Now listen up, kiddies, this shit is important. It seems long ago a great king ruled all of Hyrule, and had been able to unite all three components of the Triforce. Upon his death, his son, the prince, had expected to inherit the Triforce, but, unknown to him, his father had hidden the Triforce of Courage. Believing that his sister knew of its whereabouts, he demanded that she tell him, but she refused. Then a court magician, who had aided the prince, threatened the princess with eternal sleep if she did not give up its whereabouts. This being a bit too close to classic Disney evil for the prince to stomach, he tried to stop the magician, and succeeded in killing him, but not until after the spell was cast, and the princess pulled her impersonation of Sleeping Beauty. Torn by grief, the prince sealed her in a room in the castle, and decreed, because he was king now, damn it, and that's what kings do, that every female child born to the royal household from then on would have the name of his beloved sister, Zelda. But there was more to the story than even the prince knew. The princess's nursemaid had come into possession of 7 artifacts that dealt with the Triforce of Courage. 6 of them were crystals, and the 7th was a scroll written by the former king in an ancient and now forgotten language. Impa's family line had been entrusted, either by the original Zelda or the king himself, this is never clear, with them, and the secret that should a person ever be found that bore the mark of the Triforce on their hand, that person should be told this tragic story, and brought to the chamber where the sleeping Zelda still lay, and given the crystals and the scroll. Impa did this, and Link found that he could read the scroll, because, magic and stuff. The king wrote that he knew that the Triforce could only be truly combined by someone who was essentially pure of heart. Not finding anyone who fit this category in his lifetime, not even his own son, he cast a spell over all of Hyrule that should someone who was raised properly and gain the necessary experience arise, their hand would be marked, presumably by the missing Triforce of Courage. Naturally, the king decided, in once again Disney fashion, that the only way to truly decide if a candidate was pure of heart was to have him fight his way through a series of extremely dangerous and deadly dungeons, where the crystals could be charged one after another, leading the way to a fight against a foe custom-made to kick their ass. A dark version of themselves. Because, it doesn't matter how nice or great a person you are, true enlightenment and pure of heartness only comes if you know how to maim and slaughter. The game then proceeds as one would expect. You go from dungeon to dungeon, recharging the crystals by defeating the final bosses, which unlocks the final seal, where you fight Dark Link to prove your worth and gain the Triforce of Courage, and then unite the 3 segments, which awakens the original Princess Zelda. The appearance of Dark Link at the end of the game will prove a critical clue in this game's placement in the timeline. So looking at all of this, what can we say about this game's placement? Well, let's start not with placing the game, but placing the key events spoken of in the game, the death of the king, and the hiding of the Triforce of Courage, and work our way through the timeline from there. Now, nearly every game in the timeline so far has a Princess Zelda in it, As we know that this name is traditional because of the events told in Zelda 2, we should look at the earliest game on the timeline and see if that Zelda is a candidate for the original Zelda. The earliest game on the timeline so far is the Minish Cap, and it seems unlikely that this is the first Zelda. For starters, there's no evidence in the game of a prince. Now, it's possible that he was simply born later, or was just out of town, but it also seems unlikely that this game's king was the king spoken of in Zelda 2. After all, if he was, that would mean he simply sat by and let a mere child go about and save his kingdom, even though he had the full Triforce, and could have simply given that idiot body a royal level 3 bitch slap right at the beginning, and stopped that game before it even started. So it seems that the events in the legend occur before the Minish Cap. Indeed, an interesting candidate for the legendary king is the Hero of Men from the Minish Cap's intro, though this is just pure speculation. So now we can say with some degree of certainty that the Triforce of Courage is hidden and sealed away here, before the first game in the timeline. As it makes no appearance in the Minish Cap, and there's no evidence it was ever removed from its seal before Ocarina of Time, we can move on to that game. It's at this point that things get interesting. After entering the Temple of Light for his own 7-year sleep, the Hero of Time gains the mark of the Triforce of Courage on his hand, despite the fact that the Triforce of Courage is almost certainly still sealed. The only way that this could have occurred, and this timeline, and indeed any split timeline could still be valid, is that the King's spell has activated at this point, and marked this link as a possible candidate for uniting the Triforce as a whole. These are important points to make. Though it is implied that the Triforce as a whole is behind the seal of the Temple of Time in Ocarina of Time, it is never shown to actually be there in its entirety. This actually isn't as much of a stretch as one might initially think. After all, the line of the Impa family is the only ones that know both about the original Legend of Zelda and the items still sealed away in the Northern Castle. But not even they know that the Triforce of Courage is still sealed away elsewhere, as they cannot read the King's Scroll where this is all explained. It makes a certain amount of sense, then, that the traditional resting place of the Triforce would be assumed by everyone to have the complete Triforce. How could they possibly know better, as no one has ever been able to enter the Temple of Light to see for themselves? See, I told you this shit was about to get heavy.